See, he flinched then. This guy's not flinching at all, which I don't understand. I don't know what it is with the guys that have sickles and axes, but their running animation is badly programmed. I clearly shot him after his startup frames of the running animation while he was in the neutral state of running, and he still didn't flinch, unless the startup frames for his running animation are longer than I think, even though visually it should have already ended. So visually, it seems like the startup frames end when he enters like this neutral velocity of running, but gameplay-wise, it's probably lasting longer than I thought, so that's why I just can't get the flinch consistently on this guy. Yeah, I think that's it, because I did see when he went into the neutral state of running, his speed increased. Like, the way he moved his arm, the way his legs were moving, the speed was a lot faster when he went into that neutral state. So I was shooting him in the wrong spot, it seems, but it still doesn't make any sense. And I don't understand why this game has this problem. In Resident Evil 4, the original, the enemies never had any startup frames when they were running. They immediately transitioned into going into a constant velocity when sprinting. And that's why that mechanic of shooting them in the leg, or actually shooting them anywhere, just actually worked. But for some reason, they're using the same model that the Evil Within 1 favors, where in the Evil Within 1, there is the whole mechanic of shooting enemies in the leg while they're running to knock them over, but you have to wait for them to finish the startup frames of prepping their running animation. As soon as they go into a running animation where they have constant velocity, that's when the mechanic actually works. And on the Evil Within, I can excuse any problems with flinch animations because the flinch animations are so good in the Evil Within. And the whole advantage provided by actually shooting enemies in the leg when they're running is superb. And it actually feels like it's complementary to the good designs of the Evil Within. But on this game, it's just, there's no benefit whatsoever to actually, like, making enemies flinch on this difficulty, because it's all tied to this whole running system that the enemies have that they only do if you're actively running away from them or if you're far away from them. And they vary so much in their speed. It just varies when they choose to stop running. And it's just so stupid how during these very specific animations, that's when you get more consistency with the stuns. But any other time, you're not getting consistent stun animations. Like, why is this so gamey in its implementation? It makes no fucking sense. Like, why do they have to be so awkward with how they designed the flinch animations on this game? It just feels like one big fucking joke after another with this game. With everything that I'm discovering. I know some moron's gonna be like, oh, I'm not skillful at the game. Oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. Oh, I'm a bad player. Please don't give me that bullshit. Stop throwing around a word you don't understand. With skill, this and that. It's not like you were going around and actually examining the games like this. When you actually play the amount of Resident Evil games that I play, when you've actually made an 165-page review of Resident Evil Village, when you've actually taken the time to make walkthroughs, playing the hardest difficulties with no damage and other restrictions that actually showcase the true potential of the games, when you actually take the time to play all Resident Evil games and not just be the preferential, oh, I want to stick with Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 and ignore other Resident Evil games. Like, when you do all that, then we can actually talk about the whole idea of skills. Fucking retard. I mean, who do these people think they are, saying I'm not skillful at the game, or I don't know what the hell I'm talking about? And they're just like, oh, just enjoy the game for what it is. Well, that kind of lackadaisical nature is what is informing new Capcom's decisions with the new games, and it's why Resident Evil is in a shit state right now, because people like you are giving them incentive to not do any work with their games, and they're turning this game series into a fucking joke. And that's why this game is worse than Resident Evil Village. And this might be the worst remake of a game I've ever played. When I do my blind playthrough, I'm gonna shit all over those people. And it's funny that people think that they're being harmful to me when they're leaving their comments. They would do more harm to my channel if they weren't commenting at all. Like, if they weren't commenting on my channel at all, they'd be doing more damage. But I'm just gonna take all your hateful, spiteful comments and turn them into something truly positive for myself. when I make videos shitting all over you. You're just giving me more content to put on my channel when you're posting the kind of dumb, retarded comments that you're posting. That clearly showcases how you guys aren't even human with your thoughts. It's like you never went to school or you never went to college when you're voicing the kind of stupid opinions and so-called objective ideas that you morons have. Like you're fucking aliens. It is something else entirely. Why no flinch animation? He was in the middle of a sprint. I mean, this transition between the running animation and the attack animation, or the transition between running and just walking, I mean, it's so ambiguous with its visual representation in the game. And all of a sudden I'm able to flinch him there. But the pitchfork guys are really the only ganado that you can consistently stun, because every time you shoot them during that running attack animation, they always flinch. But I just don't know how to deal with the guys that have the sickles and the axes. As soon as he goes into that attack animation, he just stops flinching. There's no logic to the flinch animations. Like, they only flinch during very specific animations, like when they're in a neutral state of running, or when the pitchfork guys go into a running attack animation. But in an attack animation in general, they never flinch. Like, why am I able to flinch the pitchfork guys during their attack animation when they're running at me with their pitchforks, yet not during any other attack animation? Like, where's the fucking logic there? Why is this game trying to make you realize that you're in a game and not treating it like it's a fucking experience, like you're actually in an actual horror environment? I mean, it's so stupid. And why do they have to be so fiddly with their rules of flinching? I mean, what is this? Resident Evil 4 OG never had these problems. I don't see the challenge here. Why am I having to decipher this? Like this is a fucking encrypted file and I need to decipher it as if I'm like working on analyzing a code or something. I mean, what is this? He flinches then because I waited for him to get out of his startup frames for his running animation, which it's so hard to tell when they actually go back into a neutral state of running and when their startup frame period ends, because they look so similar. And I don't know why, but sometimes even when you mistime your parry and just get the regular block, you can still get the melee prompt for some reason. And that guy flinched because, again, he was in this neutral state of running. But when these guys choose to just go back into a walking animation, it makes no sense. See, like, he just immediately slows down for no reason, rather than continuing his running animation. I mean, they're so fucking awkward. And these guys, there's not even anything special about them. It's just shoot them until they die. I really don't see anything clever about this enemy. And see, why did he grab me just then? The previous crouch I did allowed me to duck under his grab, but this time it didn't work. This is why I don't understand why tailoring a crouch mechanic to a grab animation is the only way to actually bypass the grab. Because when you have two independent animations happening at the same time, so in this case, it's my crouch animation and the enemy is still doing their regular running grab animation, the chances for a mechanic to fail, in the case of my crouching, it's going to fail highly because of the fact that they don't trigger like a very specific kind of dodge animation that occurs when you perfectly time your crouch or something. And this is why I don't understand why the grabs are the way they are. The grabs in this game are the worst grabs I have ever seen in a Resident Evil game. I cannot think of a single Resident Evil game aside from like Resident Evil 6 or Village, but even then there were countermeasures put in play that allowed you to deal with the grabs. mean, in Resident Evil Village's case, it was just more so about shooting them with the shotgun before they had a chance. But and you had to amass on a lot of shotgun ammo anyway to actually deal with the enemies. But that's still not a good countermeasure system. It was just more so, oh, you just strafe away from the enemies, and that's how you actually avoid the grabs. Nothing else. Or you block the grabs in the case of the Moriekas. Like, why doesn't Leon have anything that's as reliable as the block animation that Ethan does to stop grabs from being bullshit? This is the most clueless the developers have ever been when designing a grab animation for an enemy type. And if the game is going to be all about its knife durability, then you'll have to let these enemies mutate, and you'll have to deal with them in forced encounters, if there are any forced encounters. I mean, aside from the village fight and that one castle encounter when Salazar causes those enemies to spawn in when you first meet him. But for all these mandatory combat encounters, if knife durability is such a huge factor to consider, with a vast majority of the mechanics on this game, then most likely you're not even going to be using the knife execution to stop the enemies from mutating. So you're going to be dealing with them as they are. And why they're resistant to flinch animations, it makes no sense. Just because they don't feel pain. And wow, that grabbed me at a distance. He grabbed me before he even made contact with Leon. That looked so fucking bad. But just because these enemies don't feel pain, that's what allows them to avoid flinch animations. That doesn't make any fucking sense. It's still the same physical characteristics with the Ganados. Why now are they resistant to flinch animations? And even when they're running, you can't stop this animation from happening. It's so stupid. There's zero logic in this whole mechanic. And if you're going to make the enemies not flinch when they're mutating, at least put in better mechanics that suit the gameplay. Like, look at the Bloodshots from Resident Evil 6. You countered their jump attack, you could instantly kill them. And with their melee attacks, you could go into a canned animation of actually doing a reverse cross on their face and actually putting them into an incapacitory state where their heart is exposed. I mean, that I can understand, because like the Bloodshots don't flinch normally, and you can even shoot them out of the air with any weapon when they do their jump attack. That's an enemy type that I can understand as not having any flinch animations when it's mutated. But the gameplay is still designed really well with that kind of enemy type in mind. And the game has the means for that. It has the deflect system, but for some reason you can't deflect grabs. There's zero logic in it. And the deflect system would be a much better countermeasure system to grabs being bullshit. Far better than just using the crouch. I mean, you could probably have the crouch there, but you can also use the deflect system. And you're not getting screwed by the gameplay, because the crouch is badly designed on this game. You have a reliable deflect system. Let us use it. You're consuming knife durability in the process of doing it. Why would you not let us deflect grabs? It's no different to just deflecting punches. You cut off the enemy's arm. How is cut off the enemy's arm when they grab you? Why is it that fucking difficult? Why does that screw with the developer's vision of what they wanted the gameplay to be like? There's zero logic in the implementation of the grabs in this game. And why is Leon unable to crouch aim? So like when I'm in the middle of actually trying to crouch under attacks, I have to drop my aim and then crouch. And that second of delay is enough to allow the enemies to hit me with their ranged attacks. It might honestly be better to get behind this enemy. I don't think this enemy has any back grabs. Although I do think the regular Ganado have back grabs when you're behind them. Alright, let's test out this guy. See, like, he moves fast for a bit and then he stops for no reason. He doesn't continue sprinting at me. If he was trying to do his range attack, I can understand that. But you saw it just then. You saw the increase in speed he got when he transitioned out of his startup frames. Again, that's the indication of when they're allowed to be flinched, but that's such a stupid rule that has no logic to it. And just think as well, there might be some unique mechanics associated with hardcore difficulty on this game that are just going to be removed on professional difficulty. Because Resident Evil Village did that with hardcore difficulty, with a lot of mechanics, a lot of stun animations, and The game was just stripped so bare on Village of Shadows difficulty. Just goes to show a lack of respect towards the animation team. The team that put all that hard work into their animations, and the developers just casually dismiss them as if their hard work was worthless. If I was on the animation department of New Capcom and they removed all the hard work I put into the animations on this game on their highest difficulty, I would be very offended. I'm just amazed that no one takes offense to that. When all their hard work is just thrown down the drain on the highest difficulty. Ah, oh, goddammit, I missed. Not the game's fault, that was entirely my fault. Oh, even then, that doesn't trigger a flinch animation that I can punish. It's also funny as well, I just saw a comment on that video I made titled Resident Evil 4 Remake is shaping up to be the worst remake I've ever played. But some moron said that the first 30 seconds of that video was me not being good at the game, so clearly I'm being an idiot for saying the things I'm saying. And it was all because I was in the middle of trying to deflect a guy and get behind him to do the knife execution to save time. But the fucking detection on the knife execution is terrible, not to mention the movement is so squirrely. It is so hard to get Leon to face in the direction of an enemy that he's run around, to face his back and do the execution. So this guy who made that really stupid, retarded comment didn't even consider what I was trying to do, and he's just like, oh, you're bad at the game, just based on the first 30 seconds of that video. Is that really how your thought process works? You think that's how logically you deduce what I'm doing in the video or how my playstyle is? Honestly, just yet again another seriously retarded comment from someone who thinks he's better than me because he's saying so. At least I don't go around just saying, oh, you're shit, this and that on every video I watch. I don't waste time with that. I don't need to do that. I keep my thoughts to myself, and I reserve those thoughts for content on my channel, for crying out loud. If it best suits it. I mean, most of the time I don't do that. But seriously, I mean, does that guy have a fucking education when he's voicing those kind of stupid, retarded comments? But that's literally the only way of actually getting a knife execution on an enemy on this difficulty in a more consistent fashion. If they have a weapon, or in the case of an enemy having no weapon, if they choose to punch and I deflect them, I can get behind them during that animation and just do the knife execution. But it's so awkward trying to do so because, again, the detection on the knife prompt is horrible. Not to mention the movement is so squirrely, trying to get Leon to face the guy's back after he's run around them. This is what New Capcom values as their supposedly difficult experience, or actually trying to indulge in the new mechanics on a high difficulty. In fact, as a matter of fact, what new mechanics does this game even introduce, aside from the deflection and the knife execution? Like, those are the only two things that this game has introduced that are vastly different from the original version of Resident Evil 4. And yes, there's the whole moving while aiming thing, or being able to not use the tank control system whatsoever, just using the free movement a lot more. But I mean, you don't have to call those like new mechanics. Those are just part of the new standard with games. Like, they don't apply at all. So that's why I'm saying, like, the only new mechanics to this remake are just the deflection mechanic, the knife durability, and the knife execution animation. Everything else is all just stuff I've seen in other games. Or it's just like part of a new standard that wasn't originally a standard back in the days of the original version of Resident Evil 4. It's not that interesting. And the way they've tried to incentivize these mechanics is through some very feeble means. They use poor designs to try to justify the new mechanics. Not to mention, the implementation of these mechanics alone leaves a lot to be desired, just based on what I've listed prior, like with the knife execution's detection being crap. And then the knife durability being justified through like poor designs or just having to run past enemies to actually keep it preserved so that you eventually get to that trophy that says, oh, do the game pistol/knife only, and they haven't even specified difficulty. And that's how they view this game. That's their baseline way to play this game, so they invalidate everything else. Like, they want to dilute their own creativity to allow that kind of run to be possible. Oh, and also the reticle-based system and the fact that you have to oh shoot, whatever, doesn't matter. I can easily get out of this.
Damn it.
But I was saying the reticle system where you have to focus your aim to get stuns, but it's completely invalidated on Mad Chainsaw mode. And it doesn't befit the faster-paced nature of Resident Evil 4 Remake. They're just like, oh, it was in Resident Evil 2 and 3 Remake, let's just put it in for the sake of putting it in there. It's like the whole Ubisoft thing of, they had the hook blade in Assassin's Creed Revelations, but they didn't want to include it in Black Flag because they didn't want to create a gimmick out of it, and they didn't want to simply include it just because it was in a previous game. And they didn't want to favor the whole cliche of pirates wearing hooks, this and that. But sadly, the same just cannot be said with the reticle system that they're favoring in Resident Evil 4 Remake. They must know that the reticle that they're favoring with the whole focus mechanic doesn't fit Resident Evil 4 Remake's faster-paced style of gameplay. They're just simply including it because Resident Evil 2 Remake and 3 Remake had it. And in order to justify to the idiotic fans that Resident Evil 4 Remake is part of the same series, this is one of the ways they've tried to showcase that to 7-year-olds. Because this game has the focus reticle system, and it was in the previous games, that's why this game is part of that series. That's the only logical thing I can think of as to why this mechanic is here, and why this mechanic is completely invalidated on Mad Chainsaw mode, and likely on professional difficulty as well. And just on the whole matter of skill again. I mean, the mentality that I'm favoring when actually making these deductions, actually making these observations, actually saying the things that I'm saying, it's all built on a foundation of experience, actual time to think about the game differently to other morons who just look at it on a superficial level, and that's far more valuable than any hollow skill or playstyle or anything like that. Simply playing a game is very different to actually playing a game and understanding it at a fundamental level and actually trying to get into the developer's true mentality. Alongside being very good at the game with the whole no damage thing, with actually being forced to find holes in an AI system's programming to actually use to your advantage. I mean, I hate that. I hate that the developers are forcing me to find holes in an AI system to do a section because it hints towards an underlying problem with the entire section that's due to poor designs and broken designs. When I take the time to do my walkthroughs of the Resident Evil games, there is a high amount of skill displayed right there, alongside the very good mentality to have when you're actually thinking about the world and with games. That's far more valuable than just an arbitrary skill level, this and that, like what that fucking moron decided to say, that, oh, I'm bad at the game. And he replied to a subscriber's comment, and that subscriber of mine asked what, like, if I'm using aim assist and reticle deceleration. And he said it from the perspective of a subscriber, not from some guy trying to be an asshole. But that retard who decided to leave that comment saying I'm bad at the game decided to pervert my subscriber's comment as if he was trying to insult me. How low do you have to sink to just put people down or just belittle them just to make yourself feel better so that you have your dick inflated? So that you can just inflate your dick in the moment. That's far more feeble than actually having no skill at a game. The only thing worse than a chef who can't boil is a narcissist in full denial or just over-glamorizing their own abilities. Just inflating their own abilities to shit. Chef Bastianich said that on MasterChef, and I've taken his words to heart, because they're a really good lesson. And right now, there is just nothing interesting to do with this one infected enemy. But let me just, get behind this guy. You see, he doesn't have any background, so he does have a quick turn, though. That's problematic. And he's very quick to attack during the quick turn. But pretty much all you're doing with this guy is baiting out his running grab and then knifing him 3 times and then running away. Yeah, you don't need skill to do that. This is like a draining gameplay experience right now. And they want to say pistol knife only for this game. I guess I should be glad they didn't glamorize this game for knife only and the like. And it's funny because the developers said in interviews that they designed the game for knife only, and then in a Game Informer interview, they're like, there are parts of the game that you can't do with just the knife, so it's an almost knife only run. But it's funny that they're saying that because in Resident Evil Village, for the Knives Out challenge, they're like, beat the game using only melee weapons, and then they specified Heisenberg's artillery section and Miranda's final phase as being parts of the game that you can't do knife only. So that's why I was like, oh, they've designed this game for knife only, because even though there are parts that you can't do knife only, they're still calling this game suitable for knife only. But then that leads me on to the question of why they glamorize pistol / knife only. I wonder what that means with the whole pistol thing. It still doesn't mean much if the enemies are not going to flinch whatsoever. If the pistol's already as shit as it is at flinching enemies, then what point is there to using it on professional difficulty? I mean, aside from, like, hitting enemies at a distance, that's probably it. It might be because of Salazar's boss fight. I think because of Salazar's boss fight and maybe other potential bosses that require the use of a ranged weapon, that's why they're saying pistol / knife only for this game. It's because they want to retain the boss design philosophies that favored the ranged weapons, and Salazar is really the only boss that comes to mind when it comes to being forced to use a ranged weapon. But the fact that they want to glamorize a challenge that just dilutes the game's creativity and just make the game feel like an alpha, like just 1% finished, and they want to make the player do all these awkward movements around the enemies, they want to invalidate the enemy's existences even more when you're just running past them like they're hurdles in the fucking Olympics. I mean, if you were actually the kind of person who wanted to debate with me the whole idea of skill, you would be the kind of person that would understand the folly of trying to design a game for knife only. People don't even realize or even take the time to consider the underlying impacts of designing a game for knife only. They don't realize how much it affects the core designs of the game. They don't realize how much it dilutes the developer's creativity with certain sections. I mean, if I have to explain this to you, then something's seriously wrong with you, or you haven't gone to college. I don't understand how anyone could think knife only is a fun challenge. And the only people that even take pleasure out of it are the people that are trying to inflate their own dicks or just try to make themselves seem better than other people, much like Ninja Gaiden players. And now that I mentioned Ninja Gaiden, I just want to stop right there, because I'm not talking about that shitty game series. But for new Capcom to not even, like, consider what designing a game for knife only does to dilute their creativity, or to make the game just feel so empty and bare bones and hollow, they haven't even considered that when designing Resident Evil Village and this game. It's insulting. And it just shows that amateurs are running new Capcom and designing these games, and that's why this game is turning out to be the worst remake I've ever played so far. It might be different when the final version releases, but I highly doubt it. Also, something I've even noticed as well with this game is that Leon's strafe speed is incredibly slow. I don't know why, but for some reason, Leon doesn't strafe faster than walking backwards or walking forwards. His strafe speed is equal to the speed of walking forward and walking backwards. Yet with every other Resident Evil game that has strafing, strafing is fast. Strafing is faster than your normal walk speed. Strafing just allows you to get away and actually deal with attacks that seemingly were designed with strafing in mind. But it just makes no sense how this game, like, it has crossbow guys, it has enemies with ranged weapons, but the strafing speed is so slow. Why is it so slow? It's equal to the same walking speed as if I'm walking forward or walking backwards. Why have they made this weird change? I don't remember if strafing... I mean, I believe strafing in Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake was faster than your normal walk speed. But why has this game reverted to this weird system with strafing? It doesn't even feel like strafing at that point if it's just as fast as walking forward or walking backwards. That really doesn't make any sense to me, and it feels disadvantageous. and pretty useless as well. And instead you have to rely upon this, and Leon takes a bit of time to actually prep his sprint animation. Like, having to adjust the direction he's sprinting, like going into this adjustment animation, it slows the gameplay down, and it gives the enemies a cheap advantage over you, because the enemies don't really have this kind of, like, adjustment system. And even if they do have it, they adjust their direction so much faster than Leon. And I seriously don't understand how a bunch of villagers with no fighting experience whatsoever, and yet they're augmented by the Plaga, which I don't really see what the augmentations are. I don't really see how they could increase their muscle mass or somehow be resilient to flinch animations or the like. But getting back to the main point, I don't understand how these villagers could be more efficient than Leon. The main reason why they were a very lethal enemy in Resident Evil 4 is not only because they had all the systems in place to make them balanced, but they were very dangerous in their higher numbers, and certain enemies had weapons that were incredibly annoying, like the flail guys. The flail guys in Resident Evil 4, they had a lot of range with their attacks, and they were the enemies that hit me so much. And then you had the scythe guys, where the startup frames for doing their close range attack and their long range scythe throw were exactly the same, so there were times where you could be confused as to what animation they were doing, and that's how they caught you off guard with their scythe throw. The enemies may have had all these vulnerabilities, but they had the lethal capabilities to complement the vulnerabilities to still make them deadly. I mean, in certain cases in Resident Evil 4, it wasn't properly implemented. There are definitely certain combat situations in Resident Evil 4 that are pretty bad and badly designed, like the water room area from Chapter 3-1. That whole area just reeks of clinically confused mentalities. And I've already done my walkthrough of Resident Evil 4 talking about this, so I'm not going to explain it again. But old Capcom found ways of actually giving the enemies all these vulnerabilities while at the same time making the game challenging in an interesting sort of way. But these developers of Resident Evil 4 Remake didn't even try. They just wanted to be lazy with this remake and favored the typical cliched route of just removing flinch animations to supposedly give a scary experience, when all it's going to do is just create a very aggravating, confusing, and downright annoying gameplay experience. As you've no doubt seen with the amount of gameplay I've done with Resident Evil 4 Remake and other games that just don't have flinch animations, the gameplay just falls apart. You're relying upon exploits and holes in the designs to actually get through the game in a progressive manner. I mean, why doesn't that strike the developers as just being a bad mentality to favor? I mean, new Capcom is just becoming the stupidest development team I've ever seen. And where did this kind of stupidity come from? It must have come from Resident Evil 2 Remake, surely. But then again, Resident Evil 1 Remake had pretty stupid mentalities as well. And it was made by outdated Capcom before Resident Evil 4 decided to put old Capcom at the helm, and they actually started making Resident Evil games good. Although Resident Evil 6 could have been so much better, and there were definitely parts of Resident Evil 6 that needed to be negated or downright changed. But Resident Evil 7 came out, and that is Resident Evil at its peak. Resident Evil 7 got so much right, and it's the most perfect Resident Evil game I have ever played. And sadly, it's the last good Resident Evil game I'll ever get. Resident Evil 2 Remake started a downward trend towards stupidity and downright alien mentalities. And it's all culminating in this shit remake of a game called Resident Evil 4 Remake. And after the success of Dead Space Remake, and Dead Space Remake is probably the best remake I've ever played of a game, there is no excuse for the shit quality, the pitiful quality displayed by Resident Evil 4 Remake. And again, someone's gonna be like, oh, you're just blabbering, you're just running your mouth, you're just saying shit without any form of foundation. But this is said by people who are just saying things like they're under the influence. Or like when they do all these awful things to people and they're like, this is my country, I have the right to do whatever the hell I'm doing, or when they're a fucking constitutionalist or the like. They can just they say they get away with all these things. Yet objectively it violates the law. But they want to think they're outside the law. That's exactly how fucking deluded all these people are when they're saying that I'm the one who's being the retard and the stupid person. It's clear those guys didn't go to school. Otherwise, they would have actually understood the foundation needed to build a solid argument. Or for all I know, these people are only saying those things just to make me angry. Not that they actually care about Resident Evil 4 Remake, they're just using this as an opportunity to just instill hate in me. But all they're doing is just giving me more content to do to allow me to just shit all over their comment. They're improving my commentary whenever I decide to go on tangents, because I can then discuss their shit comments and downright stupid comments in my videos. And again, they'd be doing more damage to my channel if they weren't commenting at all. So they're pretty much sealing their own fate with their stupidity. That's the end of that boring enemy. There's nothing impressive about that enemy. That is so basic. I mean, this guy's just invulnerable to flinch animations for no reason. He gets all these like cheap properties with grabs. He's able to take advantage of the bad designs present with the crouch. And he's just able to be a douchey enemy. Nothing creative about him. He's just so bland and boring. It's so hollow as an enemy type. Just like Resident Evil 1 Remake enemies. And Resident Evil 2 Remake's enemies as well. Just the most throwaway enemies ever with barely anything to them. It's like a high schooler designed this basic of an enemy type. So fucking lame. Like, why can't I punish... Like, in Ghostwire Tokyo, for instance, which is a game where Shinji Mikami is, I believe, the executive producer, whenever the enemies went into a ranged attack where they were trying to throw a sign at you, if you shot them, it would guarantee a stun on them. Like, you can't even do anything creative like that. Like, let us put him into a stun animation when he's about to throw his weapon. And he's turning the entire time on some axis point. He's not doing a genuine turning animation. He's just pivoting somehow, like a fucking AI. When I'm trying to get behind him when he's doing that. It's like there's just nothing to this enemy type. He's just resistant to everything. For no reason. And he's just a standard generic human infected by the Plaga who's behaving like a normal human. Why is he not flinching? I don't know how I got the stun just then. He clearly should have gone into the attack animation, and I therefore wouldn't have been able to stun him, but somehow I hit him during a running animation? That doesn't make any sense. Also, I don't understand why Leon knifes so weirdly. Like, if I just go back over here just so this guy doesn't attack me. If you look at the way Leon knifes, sometimes he just changes his knife stance. The direction his knife is facing, he sometimes knifes upward. And other times he just knifes directly. But, like, it fucks with the detection on the knife a lot. And again, why is Leon not able to move while he's knifing, yet you could do this in Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake? What is it about military training or like additional training characters receive after their first encounter with BOWs that just causes them to revert to inferior characters? Like, what about getting this training causes them to favor inferior fighting tactics? It's the case with every single Resident Evil engine game. And there's no kind of special mechanic with the knife like in Resident Evil 3 Remake, where you flick the analog stick down and then immediately attacked to get that very unique knife animation where Jill could actually get iframes, not to mention she could stun enemies consistently if they went into an attack animation. But there's nothing like that with this game. The direction I'm moving my left analog stick is doing nothing to change the way Leon knifes. I'm not getting any kind of unique animation. I'm not seeing any kind of unique inputting of commands to actually get unique knife animations like in Resident Evil 3 Remakes. Like, the way they designed the knife on this game is so shit, and like it has very little range as well. You have to be right up in their faces in order for the knife to actually register any detection. Any greater than that, and you're not going to hit the enemy at all. And what the fuck is the whole point of this blind fire system with knifing? When it limits Leon's movement, not to mention he's unable to change direction. I'm pushing the analogs. I mean, he is changing direction right now. But it's just not very graceful or very fluid. It's so rigid. Like he's moving like a fucking wardrobe. It's like when you're trying to move a wardrobe through a room. I mean, why is Leon unable to turn so much when he's blind firing his knife like that? Not to mention, you don't have the ability to aim your knife very well, and also the stuns generated by the knife when you're blind firing like this are non-existent, or they do happen, but they happen at less of a frequency compared to just aiming the knife like this. So why couldn't they just replace this whole shitty mechanic of knifing with just blind firing your weapons? Like, why can't this be the first third-person Resident Evil game where you can actually blind fire your weapons? So far, Resident Evil 7 and Village are the only Resident Evil games where you can blind fire your weapons without aiming. And the blind fire system would have been complementary to the faster-paced nature of this game, not to mention the fast speed that the enemies have. In the Evil Within, they had this kind of mechanic. And the whole camera system they favor, like, you could actually face the camera behind Sebastian like this and sprint towards yourself. And then you could fire your shotgun to stop the enemies from closing in on you. Blind firing the shotgun in the Evil Within was a really great mechanic. This could have given them room to actually implement a blind fire system, rather than the shitty knife system that does nothing. Not to mention, you can't turn very well when you're trying to move the left analog stick. And this would have made so much more sense if they're going to be designing a game where the enemies only flinch during very specific animations, like in the middle of a running animation. While the enemy's busy chasing you while you're running, you could use your pistol and blind fire and actually knock them over. Or use the shotgun to knock back groups of enemies. This is the perfect opportunity to put in this kind of blind fire system, but they just wanted to get lazy. And also, I don't know why Leon has this running knife attack like in Revelations 2. It doesn't serve any benefit. There's no increased damage with the knife. What the fuck is the whole point of this animation? There's no sense to it. I can't really say much about the inventory on this game. In fact, can you... Let me actually see this real quick, because this wasn't a thing in Resident Evil Village. Oh, that works? That would not work in Resident Evil Village. Taking a small item like this and placing them within a square that is highlighted by a weapon or some larger item, but not like the full amount highlighted by the item that you're over, it would never swap like this. So at least they fixed that issue. I still don't understand why the knife is part of the inventory if Leon's... Like, why hasn't he... Does he mount the knife to his chest in this remake? Because he did so in the original version of Resident Evil 4, but it's clearly not part of the attaché case. And in Resident Evil 4, the knife was not a part of the inventory, and it made sense. He mounted it to his chest. And yet, for some reason, in Resident Evil Village VR, Ethan mounts his knife to his arm, which is really cool, by the way, and yet it's still part of the inventory for no reason. It's not obstructing anything else. Why is it a part of the inventory? That's why I can't understand why this is part of the inventory. I get that they have the whole defense knife system, but like, defense knives in Resident Evil 1 Remake occupied their own separate slot. They weren't a part of the inventory. And pretty much, like, using the knife in general for just general, like, slashing like this is very pointless. Because you're primarily using the deflect system, you're primarily using the knife execution system. So all of that warrants putting the knife into its own separate inventory outside of this kind of inventory system, but they have no logic whatsoever with why they decided to put the knife in this inventory system. There doesn't seem to be anything else worth critiquing about this game. Crafting is just crafting, nothing special about it whatsoever. Aside from it being put into the inventory now, so crafting materials are in the inventory, but... I mean, is it really going to be that big of a deal if the game's going to be designed for pistol/knife only? I mean, they have put in, like, a no merchant trophy for this game, so I am going to do my blind playthrough with the no merchant restriction in mind, compared to just the pistol/knife only. And one has to wonder why you can't use grenades as defense items like you can in Resident Evil 2 Remake. You could throw grenades in general, and they'd explode, but you can also use grenades as defense items. And it was pointless, though, because that game was entirely designed for knife only, so going for anything else was pointless. But why can't you use grenades as defense items in this game? Is it because of the fact that they didn't program in a way to actually swap between the defense items in a way that makes sense? But, like, when you're grabbed, you have the option of pressing R2, the knife, but press, like, R1, for instance, to use your grenade. Like, have the allocation system be R1 for grenades when you're grabbed, R2 for your knife when you're grabbed. I mean, why is that so hard? It's so dumb. So it seems like taking off an enemy's leg actually stops them from mutating. So I definitely see what my subscriber mentioned about taking off the leg. That definitely works. But of course, when the dismemberment happens is unclear, because it's so inconsistent. But yeah, that's all I really have to say for the moment. That is so dumb. A pitchfork enemy doing their running attack is what consistently stuns this guy. Yet a single shotgun shell isn't enough to stun this guy. I had to put 5 shotgun shells into his head in order to put him into the correct flinch animation. And all she has to do is just run with that pitchfork. And she gets a constant stun lock on the chainsaw, man. Ah, new Capcom logic. You didn't have to deal with any of this really ridiculous, illogical logic in Resident Evil 4.